theories of helping that apply not only to the group setting, but the individual setting. And now it's time, as we start transitioning into the last 2/3 of the semester, we're going to start looking specifically at group and group processes that are very specific to groups. So we're going to start with a general talk today about group and group processes as far as general information. And then when we return on the 11th, we're going to start in on specifically group treatment theory that is very specific to the group setting, not necessarily the individual setting. So that's where we're headed. And so we'll go over this information today. And then when we come back, we will look at specific theories for treatment. Okay. All right, so just in general terms, what is a group? And a group is two or more individuals that come into personal or meaningful contact on a continuous basis. And groups and teams are not the same, okay? Teams are a subset of a group where teams have more structure, teams have goals, okay? Groups, when we generally talk about groups, it's groups that come together for an intentional reason. Whereas teams come together for either some type of structured more activity. And there's an important distinction between those two. Dynamics that affect a group include things like group size and group task. Normally, it's good to keep a group small, 2 to 9 members. When it comes to the treatment modality and treatment in groups, the general range for an effective group is between 6 to 9. Anything less than 6, it's hard to get good conversation going, good diversity of conversation going. Once you get above 9, you're going to look into issues of some people being ignored and time limitations. And so in general, it's recommended that group sizes be between about 6 to 9 when it comes to treatment. However, there are purposes for larger groups. So if it is like a more of a psychosocial education type of group, it can be more successfully delivered in more than 9. They usually say, so for like a more of an education group, anywhere between 9 to 30. With the ultimate number for an educational group would be 16. So when we're talking about this one, we're specifically talking about treatment, the 6 to 9. So this would be an addiction recovery group or something like that. When we're talking more educational based, more structured type groups, 16 is about the good number for that, okay? Group tasks impact how the group interact. Task interdependence show how work of one member impacts another's. And this is, again, when we take this back to the treatment aspect of groups, this is one of the important aspects of treatment, is that exact group interaction and developing what's called task interdependence, meaning that the group doesn't feel alone and isolated. A lot of times, one of the benefits of a treatment group is it allows individuals to see that there's people like them who have the same issues or the same problems or the same circumstances that they do. And so having that kind of interdependence on each member allows them to work closer together, okay? We'll skip the team part because it's not something we're really interested in. One of the concerns about groups is the issue of social loafing, okay? And this quite can often happen in groups where people are forced into the group, say due to probation or requirements of a law that was broken or something like that, or sometimes it can be a work requirement for some people. Some organizations, if they have for example, an individual who is going through some substance dependency, may ask them to do a treatment group or relapse prevention group in order to continue their employment, as an example. And in a lot of these groups, one of the issues that can be ran into is called social loafing. Now, I'm sure this is a 200 level course, so I'm sure somewhere along your academic lines you've been in a group project in your classes where there's that person in the group that just kind of he or she shows up, but he or she just kind of glides with the group. That's what social loafing is. And as a group facilitator, this is something that you want to monitor and really want to engage in, okay? And some of the ways that they recommend reducing the chance of social loafing, even in those groups that it's required, is making sure that everybody's contribution is identifiable. So with some individuals, when they're really resistant, any little comment kind of saying, hey, did you hear so-and-so say this? That was interesting. Can we expand on that? Or finding ways to make contributions more visible. Emphasizing the value of individual contributions. And this is, in every group, in the beginning and the end, as a facilitator, it's important to go to each member and have that moment with them and welcome them, allow them to ask how things are going, and then at the end, going to each member and showing appreciation for their attendance, if that's all it was, or comments they made, is an important way of reducing inhibitions in a group setting. And again, keep the group to an appropriate size. Like I said, treatment is 6 to 9. Psychoeducational, the ultimate size is 16. And so keeping those numbers within that range really helps eliminate a lot of what we call the social loafing, or people just getting by. We also have to recognize that when we do activities within a group, there's different types of interdependencies that our group members will have with each other. Interdependence is the reliance on someone else within the group setting to come to a solution or to a conclusion. Pooled task interdependence is members make separate independent contributions to a group things. And we saw pooled task interdependence with things like cognitive behavioral therapy. In a cognitive behavioral therapy group, the pooled tasks are identifying things such as their individualized triggers. And what ends up with this is the group performance in this type of situation is the sum of the members' contributions. So a lot of times in a cognitive behavioral therapy group, say relapse prevention and identifying triggers, pooled task interdependence is going through each of the participants' triggers for that week. And then in a lot of times you'll see other individuals within that group going, wow, I triggered to that too, and they didn't recognize it originally. And also in a lot of times using a pooled task interdependence where there's individual contribution that then is summarized by the facilitator. So a lot of times you'll go through and you'll go look at everybody's triggers and cravings. And then as the facilitator, you'll summarize or say, this is what we've recognized today in common threads between the group members' statements. Sequential task interdependence is members perform tasks sequential order. Hard to determine individual performance since one member depends on the other. This is used in a lot of, for example, icebreaker situations and used in the front where you have to remember what the previous group member stated and that person, what that person stated before that, and there's a sequential thing. This is used really in relationship building between group members where they have to remember and then sequentially provide what other group members said that. An example of this is that if you remember at the beginning of the semester, I had everybody introduce somebody else in the class. That's an example of sequential task interdependence, okay? Reciprocal task interdependence is work is performed by a member in it. I can't talk all of a sudden. Work is performed by a member is dependent on work by others, okay? So this is, again, if we go to relapse prevention group and you have some members that are newer and some are older, and they go through different relapse prevention techniques, and you use the individuals that have been there longer to kind of help the younger group members or the newer group members kind of understand relapse prevention tasks, okay? And this is where really members share information and work closely together. If you want to think of reciprocal task interdependence with AA, you have the sponsor program, right? Where you have a sponsor who you can call at any time and they'll help you through a craving or a trigger that you've had. Inside the group, it's really about having members work together, especially in what we call open groups. An open group is a group where someone can join at any time. Versus closed groups where there's a specific start time and a specific end time and the membership stays the same. You'll see a lot of reciprocal task interdependence in groups that have an open access or an open access group model. A lot of times this occurs, for example, in domestic violence psychoeducational group for survivors. And a lot of battered treatment groups are designed as an open access. And so you use group members that have been there for a while to kind of role model or to help the newer members kind of, one, get comfortable, but also understand the process. Now, we're going to go over several different models of processes and groups, but they're really all based on this base model of the life journey of a group or most groups, okay, that happen in what's called forming, storming, norming, performing, and a journey, okay, and we'll go through each of these stages here in just a second, but what this stage model recognizes is that groups go through a sequential journey together. Okay, so with most groups, we start off with getting to know each other. All right, and then we go through and analyze the problems that each member has and get them storming and recognizing the issues that are going on that drive whatever they're there for. And then you get into the norming phase where people recognize, hey, I'm not the only one that goes through this. And that other people have these problems, and the group starts to become very cohesive. And then you go through the performing phase, which is then you implement different tasks to help the group out. And then you continually evaluate that until finally the adjourning phase, okay? Now, let me go to this because I think it's an important slide. On this axis from low to high, we have degree of maturity. So this is how group members treat each other, how group members act towards one another, okay? And as you can see in the beginning, the maturity level of a group is really low, and it's at its peak when everybody's performing, okay? But then just past the performing pace, the maturity of the group starts to go down. It starts to degrade, okay? And the reason behind that is because individuals are starting to take on those behaviors that are healthy, hopefully, independently of each other. So they come and spend the 60 minutes in the group, and they start to recognize that they're making changes in their life, and they stop relying on the group so much, and they start relying on their own individual behaviors. So a good timing of when you can recognize that individuals are really starting to take on the tasks that they need to start to become healthy and to become independent, really is when you're seeing the top performance, and then you see that performance in the group start to go down. That's actually a good sign. And a lot of times it's not recognized that way. I've supervised a lot of group facilitators, and they'll get to this top peak where each week they're having awesome groups. Everyone's working together. Everyone's cohesive. They've done the searching. They've done the I'm not the only one. These are what we're going through, and they're all doing this performance. And you're having these very awesome groups, and then all of a sudden, the group starts to deteriorate. Okay. And for a lot of novice group facilitators, they start to ask, what am I doing wrong? Is there something I'm doing bad? And then when we review what they're doing, that most of the time, that's a sign of that your group members are doing what they need to do. And it's getting near the time to terminate the group. Because it's no longer becoming beneficial, as you can see by this downward arrow. So the importance of this graph is to recognize that groups become ultimate successful when they get through the norming and they start performing. But once they start performing and they start to take on those healthier behaviors for themselves, they'll stop relying on the group so much, and the group stops being as important as the new healthy habits or healthy living that the individual is going through. And so they'll start to rely less on the group, and the group will almost kind of become almost like you were in the beginning, okay? And so it's important to recognize the cycle that all turnarounds going towards the negative aren't always necessarily bad. So if we were to talk about each of these groups independently, we can talk about the forming of the group, okay? What is the job of the facilitator when we're first coming together? One, it is a disclosure of confidentiality rules. It's disclosure of the purpose of the group. It's all that technical stuff for the facilitator. What is the job of the group member is to absorb all the information from the facilitator, but also start developing relationships with the group members, okay? And this really should be, when we talk about facilitation skills, this really should be modeled by the facilitator. So in the forming stage, we see group is brought together and orientation occurs. That's the disclosure statements that I was talking about. Become aware of friendships and task objectives, okay? This is, if you've ever, you'll find in most groups by about the first or second group, you'll always have members who sit by each other and they'll always conjoin in kind of the same area of the group room, unless the facilitator messes with their groups. And it's really during this phase where people are attracting to people who are most like them and make them feel safe and comfortable. And try to avoid those that don't make them feel that same way. And then once that has developed, the amount of information and commitment and acceptance of this says organizational goals is important. That really, with a lot of groups, the reason why we do this, these are the standard rules. So maybe for a group, we have like 5 to 10 rules that all group members have to follow, like respect for each other, giving each other time to talk, showing up on time. But at this level too, then we also usually say, and what other rules would you all like for this group? And you allow the group to determine, well, I had one group that outlawed chewing gum during group. And they all consented to that, but that's probably been my strangest rule that group members have come up with. It was no chewing gum. And during this, there is also, we have to recognize that our group members have anxiety. One, because they're being introduced to a new social context. But two, they know that they have to have some type of performance, okay? And that there's going to be tasks asked of them. So on the social level, we're asking them to become close to usually complete strangers. And up front, we're going to say there's a lot of hard work that you're going to go through in order to be successful in this group. I always go back to a quote by Carl Jung. And even though there's now things harder than this, he said, if there's anything harder than still, it is to know oneself. And a lot of these groups, I mean, that's what we're asking our clients to do, is to become self-aware of themselves, even beyond the capacity of people who don't attend groups. A lot of times we try to get people to have a level of self-awareness that really typically the general population themselves don't have. And so there is a lot of anxiety about individual psychological capacities to be successful. So we've introduced strangers, and we're going to say this is going to be a really difficult journey, but it's going to be worth it. And probably one of the important things of the facilitator in order to alleviate a lot of these issues is to instill a sense of group efficacy and belief in the group and its abilities. And this really can be instilled by the facilitator, who in the beginning will be seen as the leader of the group, because you are quote unquote the expert. You're the one there delivering the group. You're giving the initial rules. In the beginning of a group, the facilitator truly is seen as the leader. And in that, you have to use a lot of leadership skills, such as instilling a belief that as a group, we can be successful. And group self-efficacy is just the beliefs of group members to say they can be successful because they're there. They're around people like them. and we're all going to be working on this issue together. Now, there's a couple things that come up in the storming phase, okay? And again, in the storming phase, you can liken it to almost an intake assessment, even though usually you'll do an intake assessment to see if the group is appropriate. The storming phase is kind of just individuals telling their stories of why they're there, what they're hoping to get out of the group, what led them to be in that group. And it's during this phase that groups are at most risk for things such as anger and frustration. And also, we have to recognize that in human behavior, we have a sense of competitiveness, okay? And in all groups, there will be dominant members and submissive members. And we have to recognize that conflict, while it is important for recovery and really coming to one's conflict, in the group setting, if it's not managed well by the group facilitator, can lead to frustration and anger, okay? And again, I'll go back, I can talk about my experience, and I can talk about the individuals I've supervised in the novice years of group facilitation. Really, group members will follow the facilitator where the facilitator takes things. And sometimes, especially novice facilitator, instead of diffusing the conflict and understanding the conflict, can unnecessarily create more frustration and anger among the group members. And this comes in, and I talked about this in the beginning of the class. This is where facilitator self-awareness is important. Understanding and accepting one's own biases and one's own limitations of knowledge, okay? And, you know, I've ran into situations where there were religious differences, where there's cultural differences, and there's ethnicity differences. I will tell you, at one time I was doing a group, I think it was a relapse prevention group. And at the time, it was PC to call someone from South America, especially Mexico, Hispanic. And that was the PC term back then. And so in this group, there were quite a few Hispanic individuals, and not understanding my own things, I introduced the idea of Hispanics and why they end up where they are and blah, blah, blah. And there was a group member who got very upset with me because she came to me and she was very angry afterwards. And she's like, you need to understand something, Mr. Peterson. I'm a Mexican, I'm not a Hispanic. And there's a clear difference where I come from between Mexicans and Hispanics. And you've insulted me. And so in my mind, of course, I was being politically correct because that was the term that was used then. But then I had to do some reflection and realize I brought something up that I wasn't fully informed about. And we have to recognize that within ourselves. The other facilitators that I've worked with often have run into issues with religion. And, you know, a lot of times there's a bias that most Americans are Christian based. And I've had facilitators who say something Christian and there would be a Muslim or someone of a Jewish descent in the room. And that causes a lot of issues. So in this, I'm just want to make the point is that facilitators can diffuse a situation, but if they don't know themselves well enough or know their limitations of knowledge or haven't got to know their group members, they can actually flame a lot of the frustration and anger that comes out during the storming phase. So this is a skill that we will talk about a lot throughout the end of the last 2/3 of this course, is dealing with conflict resolution within the group setting. But I'm going to bring it back again. A lot of conflict resolution starts with the facilitator. And we also have to recognize, especially in our field, though, that conflict, and this is for general groups, I would actually mention that a lot of conflict is beneficial in the treatment group setting because it gives an opportunity for people to look at themselves. It's been brought up quite a few times, for example, that people who have substance abuse problems often deny that they have a problem in the beginning. And this is one of those opportunities through conflict to kind of bring those issues to light and really explore why people feel that way. Okay. So once we get through the storming phase, we get to the norming phase. And this is where, if we successfully resolve conflict and we made sure that group members got to know each other, their experiences, and how their experiences connect with one another, this is when we go into the norming phase. This is where members begin to feel positive about the group itself and what it's supposed to do. I will tell you, in my experience, when this is done successfully, the number one advertisers for your group actually becomes your group members, because those start going talk to family members, to neighbors, to whoever they can come in contact with and say, hey, listen, I'm doing this group. I've noticed that you're going through the same thing. I really think, and the most successful groups I've ever had, as far as people wanting to be a part of those groups, didn't come through advertising through my agency or court-ordered treatments or anything like that. It came from the group members that were part of that group. And really, I've always said this to people I've trained clinically, is that when you have that happening in a group setting, you know you're in what's called the norming phase of the group, okay? And this is when group members start to feel we are in this together, that we've come to this common ground, we've gone through the conflict, and we're all here now. We will also notice that during the norming phase, roles are set. You'll have in a lot of groups, you'll have kind of those leaders that kind of try to get everyone talking. You'll have the sergeants who kind of are the ones that keep control of the group. You'll have those ones that will encourage people to talk and will recognize those individuals who have a hard time talking and will encourage them. This is when the group takes over the group process, and the facilitator role goes from a leadership role to an actual facilitation role, where you are then there to kind of facilitate the conversation, but the group has all of its roles and its norms set, and they're being enforced by the members that they then should be able to take over the conversation once the facilitator had seeded what the group should be processing or talking about or going through. This is where we see that the list of rules goes from that set number of confidentiality, those 5 to 10, and then whatever group members went, that you start to see informal rules of behavior. And you'll see group members almost start to mimic each other, okay? And they'll be widely shared and enforced by group, okay? And really, really there's we also start to see during this phase that dress and humor and attitude towards the group setting, not necessarily the organization in our set, starts to take form, okay? And so this is really an important component when we start talking about treatment modality. Okay. This is more organizational issues dealing with groups. Where on an organizational or outside the treatment that we often talk about top management, critical events, proceedings, and we won't get too much into this one just because it deals more with work groups and management type of groups. Okay. Oops. I remember. Let me see. So I want to talk about some of the things that facilitate a cohesive group that we've kind of already talked about. We've talked about having a common goal. Okay. Coming to the norming phase and going into the performing phase, we need to recognize success. Okay. I think the best example of this is in AA groups. When you achieve a next step in the program, you get a coin, or how many days sober, you get some type of recognition for that. But this also can happen in any group setting where, a lot of times facilitators will say, how was your week? Give me an example of a success. Give me an example of a struggle. And in that situation, the important thing is to recognize and put equal weight to both the successes and the challenges. Because a lot of times what I've seen, especially with novice facilitators, is they'll ask for what was your successes and what were your struggles this last week, and they'll completely ignore the success and go right into giving feedback or having group members give feedback about the struggles the person experienced. But in successful facilitation, it's important to give equal weight when you're asking about successes and challenges. We've already talked about size. We should spend a little bit of time. We'll actually talk about interpersonal attraction more in depth, especially when we get to ethics section, because there is a chance, because of how close groups can get, because of the nature of the group going through a problem together, there is always that possibility of some type of interpersonal attraction between members. And so in a lot of cases, this is sometimes why women have separate treatment groups than men, or in co-occurring groups, there's very specific boundaries that the facilitator sets up. But I can tell you that interpersonal attraction is not always just intimate attraction. I've seen where in most groups I've done have worked with females, and I've seen where this level of attraction, I've had group members be tempted to move in with each other. They've tried to even be intimate, even though they claim that they were heterosexual and stuff like that. So interpersonal attraction is a facilitation issue that you may have to address during the group process, especially when you have intermixed gender groups, or you have groups where there's a lot of intimate details given about group members. We also have to recognize external threats, okay? That group members are only with us for a certain number of hours per week, or maybe even less. Sometimes there's groups that go bi-weekly. And we have to recognize that there's always external pressures that are put on group members that are counter to our group goals. And so we have to recognize those. And when we see group members struggling, sometimes it's time to do that one-on-one, okay? We have to recognize status within the group setting, and that, you know, especially when we have groups that have mixtures of ethnicities, we have mixtures of social economic statuses, we have mixtures of even on gender, because those are all status things here in the United States that we have to make sure. And again, this is a facilitation skill that we'll get into, that status does not become a determinant of who gets to have the time to talk, who has the time to provide solutions to other group members. Because again, going back to groups that I've supervised, and there's different status groups within that single group that can play a role. And it's really, again, a facilitation skill of making sure that direction is put towards all group members, regardless of the status they're there for. And I will also state that this goes back to individual facilitation skills of recognizing one's own biases and issues when it comes to status. Because again, I've had a lot of novice group facilitators who tend to really unconsciously give more attention to the higher status group members and less attention to lower status group members. And it's usually always done on an unconscious level. And in the settings where I supervise, it usually meant that I would record a few sessions and I would watch, and with the facilitator, I'd watch the facilitator's positioning of body. And sometimes facilitators unknowingly will give direct body language to people of higher status, and will give a side status or not direct positioning to group members who are of a lower status. And so this is something to recognize within ourselves. We also need to recognize that in a group setting, we're really there for cooperation. And sometimes in the group settings, you'll get what's called subgroups. And these are groups that kind of want to take over and don't want to recognize other groups within the setting. And again, we'll talk about this. This is another facilitation skill, and recognizing when groups get divided. And sometimes it means that the facilitator has to get directly involved by assigning seating, for example, and separating certain group members. But we'll talk about when to recognize when a group gets to that kind of extreme level, how a facilitator should react and implement a plan to reduce those separations and cooperation. Okay. All right, I am going to stop here, and I'm going to ask, does anybody have any questions about, so we've gone through the norming, storming. We need to get through the achieving level of a group, and then the endings. But we only have about 15 minutes left, so I kind of wanted to stop here. How is everybody doing with this general model of group process?
Hi, this is Klein, and I just want to say today's lecture is basically an eye opener, or things that I have noticed in the groups that I run. The social loafing, I'm here, it's either here or go back to jail kind of deal that I usually work with at times, or I don't want to be here, but my trouble court has made me come here. So I could relate to what social loafing about and what it does to the whole group and to the facilitator, trying to get them involved, trying to get them to see why they're there. There are some success stories where they started off as, social loafing, and then halfway they realized this is something that I need. This is something that I can use. This is something that can help me. And that success stories that they develop throughout their time here. So I just wanted to say today was, as always, I enjoyed today's lecture.
Thanks for that feedback, Klein. And one thing that I do want to also reinforce too is we can have all the skill in the world as a facilitator and the like. And there will always be a certain percentage of individuals within any group who are not going to be successful, who will stay in the social loafing area. And so, in a lot of ways, we will work on skill development to reduce that as much as possible. But I would say it is also important to recognize, when I worked in the prison system as a clinician, I did a lot of groups and stuff, and I always told my inmates, okay, this first time is on me. Okay, because you're coming to these groups, maybe it's the first time you've been through treatment, maybe it's the first time you've done that. So this time is on me. But from here on out, you coming back to prison or you getting back into addiction, that then is on you. So you can take what you want from this group, but this time's on me, the second time's on you. And that's something that we have to recognize as service providers is it's that old saying, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And so there is a lot to say about, group facilitation. There will always be some member who doesn't take. But as long as we put in our side of the effort, that's the important part. And that's where those success stories are very helpful in. So thank you, Klein, for that feedback. Any other comments about today's lecture? Thank you, Ava, for your feedback. Okay. All right, gang. Well, when we come back, we will look at the so we've been through this storming and norming, and now we need to get into, okay, we have the group, we have a cohesive group. How do we get them then to start putting change into their life? And then again, we got to remember that when we're successful at this, not all groups end feeling good, because they shouldn't. Because people should be able to take the skills they learn and start applying it in their own life and stop relying on the group as much. So, and we'll talk about that more as we go. But beyond that, remember, no class Thursday, because I want to encourage you to take advantage of the cultural events. I want you to use the time, if you need to catch up in your classes so that you can enjoy your fall break. So next time I'll see you as a class is on October 11th. I do hope that I see you at the October 10th thing. If you want to know more about sociology, psychology, counseling, addiction treatment, social work, we'll have all the faculty members in those areas there to talk about how we can help you get there. So with that being said, have a wonderful fall break. Take the time to embrace what you have and what you're going through and your culture and who you are as an individual. So have a good week and a good break, everyone.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
Yeah, Lyle.
Are you gonna put this on Zoom?
Yeah, I will post